Hello. Welcome to the Stuck in the Mail podcast, episode 37. Today, we are talking about a really cool early 90s band that had this really unusual and obscure follow up to their big album. We're not talking about the big album today. We are talking about the follow up EP by EMF, which is called Unexplained.
And
The
I have the big album, Schubert Dip, on CD long box, sealed. And look at these hip guys. There they are, those hip Brits.
So hip. Hey, that's pretty cool that you have the long box, Casey.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that later on, I guess.
So EMF, they come from the town of Cinderford in Gloucestershire. How's my pronunciation? This is in the Forest of Dean in
hmm
Western England, not too far from Bristol, and the whole scene that would come in the later 90s. So it's pretty interesting. I guess you would call them indie electro pop.
That's about as good as you can get, I suppose. Yeah. British hip hop would be one thing you could throw in there too.
Yeah, especially on the first album, they were leaning into the hip hop that was happening in the early 90s. These guys made it big, and I mean big, as in you can hear them even today on commercials with their big smash hit, Unbelievable, that has made it into Kraft, Crumbelievable, what is it, mac and cheese or something?
That's right. They made some of that real cheddar.
Yeah, but that was pretty much their only big hit. That's okay. It
Yeah.
is a great, important hit. So the members of EMF were maybe you could hold up that long box. That was a really good photo. I don't know which is which. I should know. But the members
This is the
are,
singer.
yep, James Atkin. He did vocals and guitars. We have Derry Brownson on keyboards and samples. That's an
Very
interesting
important
part about
note.
this band is lots and lots of samples.
hmm
So many samples that I didn't even realize how unusual it was at the time, but it's very unusual. Mark DeClout on drums, Ian Dench, keyboards and guitars, and Zach Foley, R.I.P. on bass.
Yeah, if these guys' hair was longer and they looked weirder, you could think they were Jane's Addiction, early Jane's Addiction. But since they're British, they don't look at all like
Yes, true.
basically.
Now we have to talk about the name EMF. What does it stand for? So officially, the band has said it stands for Epsom Mad Funkers.
hmm
Epsom Mad Funkers. So apparently, depending on what you read, it was either taken from a fan club of the band New Order
Which makes perfectly good sense.
or possibly a magazine referred to fans of New Order as Epsom Mad Funkers, which makes
Epsom
sense.
being a town, right? Epsom being outside of London.
Yes, probably where the salt is made.
Yes.
Uh, so, that's a very, I don't know. We did the same thing in our band. We just read random, obscure, weird names and said, hey, that'd be a cool band name. So apparently that's what happened here. Epsom Mad Funkers. Now, the plot thickens a little bit because, Casey, did you know that on their first album, Schubert Dip, there was a hidden track?
I don't think so. I don't think I owned it until I bought this sealed long box maybe 5, 6 years ago. And, I've only streamed it now, but that was really common back then.
It
Really
was
common.
really common, but the best I can figure is that the original version of the album must have had this hidden track, and then they removed it on the
Uh,
version that I have because the
Samples.
version the version I had on cassette did not have the hidden track. The hidden track is called EMF, and
Hmm.
I listened to it today for the first time in my life. And it's the whole song is basically them goofing around saying, and I quote, "Ecstasy, mother
Uh,
effer,
hmm
from us to you.
Yep.
Ecstasy, mother effer, from us to you, EMF."
Which is
So
which is probably where you get the whole folklore, that being the abbreviation, probably.
apparently so, but this was news to me. I had never heard this before, and it actually is kind of a cool, goofy little song, a live recording that's at the very end of the album. Apparently,
Well, this is the earliest of what would become British rave scene. This is a pop version. But of course, ecstasy being a big part of the rave culture. Um, Not something I'm familiar with, but it ties in. This is a real predecessor, a real pop version.
Sure.
And I guess you could say, I don't know, CNC Music Factory in America, which was
Hmm.
kind of like a Milli Vanilli or a Boney M, like kind of like a fake band to some degree, like made by record labels, but like that's like an American version. Am I stretching, Mike? Is that too?
No, this is great. I'm so glad you mentioned CNC Music Factory because that was like the first pop song that I was obsessed with was Gonna Make You Sweat.
Mhm. Yep.
Everybody dance now. Uh,
Yep.
I heard it at the Willits Science Fair.
Nice.
My friend was like, "Hey, Mike, listen to this on my Walkman." So
Uh-huh.
I listened to Gonna Make You Sweat, and we went to Taco Bell and got nachos Bel Grande.
Nice. Nice. The Willis Taco Bell is great.
Shout out.
Sarah, my wife, will love that comment. You know who else needs to be thrown into this mix, especially this era, late 80s, very early 90s, is Ace of Base, because like they could barely even speak English. It's like the Swedish version of a record label put together band to some degree. Not
Well,
that EMF was inorganic. EMF was organic for sure, but that sound, that pop sound
sure.
that they produced kind of feels a little less organic.
Well, and
But
you better believe that I had CNC Music Factory, or at least I taped it off somebody.
oh yeah,
And I certainly had Ace of Base, which is the Fogelberg of the 90s.
it is an easy CD to find. Maybe not as easy as REM's Monster,
Yeah,
but
I was about to say Monster. Oh,
wow,
this is good.
height of the CD era. That's where the prices came down.
As you
Anywho,
might be able to tell, dear listener, this was kind of our sweet spot. This is when Casey and I were both in like
oh yeah.
late middle school, kind of starting to pay attention to music. So all of this,
Mhm.
hit us pretty deeply.
This is the cassette and single if you don't have enough money era for Mike and I here. A
Oh, yeah.
truly somewhat embarrassing era, but I want to touch upon that era because CDs are getting popular right now because records are so expensive. And that's what happens, kids. It's called Econ 101. But so this is probably foreign to most people. And this actually has a CD in it and then a lot of air. And I believe a piece of styrofoam, not unlike an NES cartridge tape, as they were called. Uh, and you would buy them like this. It's really quite a nice format. It's better than the plastic sheath that warehouse would have to unlock. And the reason why it was this size was that you could fit two, and it would almost be 12 inches like a vinyl record. And that way, all these record stores didn't have to buy new hardware, shelving. So that is where this actually started. And it only lasted for a couple years before obviously they cut costs and we're not making cardboard for a CD, So
Yeah,
interest
I,
interesting piece there.
that is. I sort of assumed it was a theft prevention thing too.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it worked like that too, because you're not going to be able to really, shove this under your pants or in your jacket, but maybe.
If you're wearing EMF style clothing, you could.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the baggy era, so maybe they're like, oh well, people are stealing CDs anyway, so.
Which,
But
by the way, a good segue because I really appreciate your fit today, Casey.
oh yeah, this is actually my good friend Andrew McCrae's artwork that I'm wearing as a sweater that I probably bought a decade ago. I don't know how he's doing, but he's an interesting guy, and this, this might be the most '90s look I have. So, um, let's
Well,
let's get back on track with the EMF here, though. Now that we've covered the wonderful CD long box era.
yeah, can we talk about Schubert dip? I feel like we have to. We
Yeah,
got to set the tone. We got to set the foundation for where
sure. Okay.
Unexplained came from. Schubert dip came out in 1991. Um, I read somewhere that it's called Schubert dip because Ian Dench, who was like the musical genius behind the band, that he would dip into Schubert for some inspiration and
Yeah.
melodies and stuff, which may be
Mhm.
true. Apparently in apparently in England they call Fun dip, the powder that you dip.
Uh-huh.
They call it
Uh-huh.
sherbet dip.
Okay.
Sherbet dip. So apparently it was a play on words and the fact that he appreciated Schubert.
Hmm.
Uh,
I
anyway,
I can't help but think there's some thinly veiled, again, rave culture, drug culture references there too. So we'll throw that in as a possibility.
perhaps James Atkin, if you're watching, fill us in, please. Thank you for the music, sir. Okay, so Schubert dip. I mean, let's just say it's a little goofy. Pretty much the same beat on every song. It's that Ashley's Roach clip, thing. Uh, you've got a lot of breaks. As I was listening to it, I had forgotten how many breaks there are, like where it stops and then it comes back in. Like almost every song has these kind of
Mhm.
very. It's great because uh, for a short attention span, it doesn't
Yeah.
allow you to.
And so there it's Ian's the singer, right?
No, James Atkin.
James Atkin. I'd love to talk about his voice here.
Cool.
His voice. What are your what do you think he sounds like?
I really think that the secret to his charisma is, for me, is mainly his accent.
Yeah.
Such a thick, like I guess Western England accent. Kind of like a little bit of a breathy almost.
Oh yeah. So breathy, right?
Like he's singing aggressively, but he's not an aggressive singer.
Yeah, yeah, and that starts to give me weird sensations of I don't think I have a direct comparison besides some other contemporaries of this time, but if I was to think breathy, I'd be like, I don't know, Billy Corgan, Bono, like,
Uh-huh.
like who's a breathy singer? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some good ones, but we'll go with those two.
Breathy.
Yeah, I mean he really he can sing a loud note like hold it out, but it's just breath, like it's just expulsion of air or something. I don't
Yeah.
know a lot about singing technique, but he has this singing technique that's catchy. And then the act that kind of followed EMF, Jesus Jones, kind of similar, not as extreme.
Well,
Um,
Jesus Jones is an interesting case, which we can't get too far afield here.
right.
But I, of course, had Jesus Jones Doubt as my. So REM Out of Time was my first cassette. EMF Schubert Dip was my second cassette. Jesus Jones Doubt was my third cassette.
Yep. Yep.
And Jesus Jones definitely had a Billy Corgan thing going on with like the soft and the
Yeah.
snarl.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a little bit of that with EMF, but it's mostly the soft.
Their big hit being right here, right now. I mean, you might think it was EMF. They had the same like
Yeah.
band, really.
On the song right here, right now, he is singing like
Yeah.
Atkin.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
And that was their big hit. So these two bands, and we're not going to cover Jesus Jones now, but they really piggybacked on each other, and they were both British bands. This was a
Yep.
British scene. Somehow the music industry in America in the early 90s just didn't know what to do, and they just kind of pivoted to being like, let's see what's going on in England, you know? The
And,
the the hip hop scene of the late 80s of America and the introduction of the sampler,
yes.
which is what these guys took and ran with and did their own weird dance rave British pop version of, is it's really interesting, you know.
It is interesting. So they're very pop in the sense they have these like break beats, they have these kind of
Oh.
sampled drums, they're wearing hip hop clothes. It's almost novelty territory a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, there's a couple songs, especially on the first album, that are really goofy, like "When You're Mine." They're just like white kid funk.
Yeah, oh
Um,
yeah.
but so they almost have this like boy band thing going on, but at the same time, Ian Dench, the guitarist in particular, is a hot guitarist. This
Mhm.
guy can play. I mean, surprisingly, when you listen back to these songs, and he's a musical genius. He went on to write songs for like Jordan Sparks. He's still like an in-demand producer
Oh
today
wow.
for
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Beyonce and
Hmm.
I forget of Shakira. Like he's written all these famous songs. So the guy's a musical genius. He already was a musician when the rest of the guys were just like joking around and doing this weird like
Uh,
faux hip hop thing. Ian was like a real guitarist and he was a lot older than them and they were like, "Hey, come join our band." And so to me,
hmm.
that's what makes this band so interesting is you have this
Yeah,
fusion of the goofy novelty, jump around, I don't know, like
sure.
early 90s of it all, and then you have Ian Dench, which adds this darker guitar tone to it. So
Hmm.
there's a
I didn't know
little,
that.
yeah, there's a little bit of that on the first album, but mostly the album becomes, or the band becomes more rock oriented on Unexplained, which is why Unexplained fascinates me. I love the transitional albums, Casey. You know that about me.
Yeah, well, I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, but this is our first EP, and you got to give me just a minute here to nerd out I'm going to actually announce my rant here. Do you know the history of the EP, and do you know what an EP is?
Well, I thought it was extended play.
Correct.
Unexplained EP was certainly my first exposure to the term EP, and I was like, "What is EP?" So please tell me.
Yeah, it seems like it would be like something relating to unexplained, but that'd probably be unexplained ESP. But anywho, here's the short of the EP. The EP does mean extended play. Well, that doesn't make any sense. In general, an EP is 3 to 6 songs, can be on a 7 inch, it can be on a 10 inch, it can be on a 12 inch, if we're getting into vinyl here. But the really important thing to know is way, 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 way back when in the 40s, the 45 came out by RCA Victor, and actually, right before that, the 12-inch came out, and that was by Columbia. So these record labels are making the format that is the thing, right? So RCA Victor, or at the time, RCA, what would become RCA Victor, has the 45, and Columbia has the 12-inch, what would become known as the album, because songs would be released as, 12 songs. So RCA Victor came out with the extended play. So it's longer than the 45. So that's why an EP is longer than a single, a 45 or whatnot, but not longer than a 12-inch. And that's my whole rant.
Is it comparable to a 7 inch?
Usually an EP is on a 7 inch, especially back in the day. In like the 90s, whole punk albums were on what would be called a 7 inch EP. This
Okay.
gets into a much longer discussion that I don't want to bring into this. But the funny thing is that these original formats, like the record and what the record was, were these record label things. And it was RCA versus Columbia. So to combat essentially what is the album we know today, RCA was like, well, we're going to make a longer 45 and it's called the EP.
Yeah.
So that two of them, there'd be like 2 songs on each side. And those old late 40s, early 50s EPs are like that. And you can find them all the time. And that was just RCA trying to combat essentially what would win out that war, and become
Interesting.
the album. So that's
Well,
the EP. And it
you're
is
give
extended from
you're
a
giving me that's helpful, and you're giving me an idea for a future episode, which I won't talk about right now. So as I recall, I bought the cassette of Schubert Dip. You bought the single for the song Lies,
Mhm.
which your version of the song sounded way cooler than mine, and I was a little bit salty about that. It's a lot punchier. There's like this wailing vocal sample. There's a lot more
Yeah.
breaks in it. Here's
Is
another
it the
weird
second
thing.
Lies? Like that's the later one was on like a single, right?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
you can find the remix like on streaming, the
Do you
version
know
you
what's
had.
wrong with the original Lies? Because I came across it this morning.
I do, and we're not going to say the guy's name to give him any
No, but
publicity.
it's a sample, and it involves Lennon and Lennon's assassin and Yoko Ono saying like you can't sample that, and that makes sense.
Yes, correct. And I had heard that, and I was like, I thought that my version of Lies had that sample, but no,
No.
it's before the song starts. And
Mhm.
my tape did not have that. My tape did not have the hidden track. So
Mhm.
mine was like, surely the original version, which I would wonder which version you have on your long box, surely the original version of this album has to be valuable because it has the
Yeah.
that stuff. Maybe. Do you have any recollections of Schubert Dip, or I thought you had the album, but you just had the single.
Yeah. I didn't have it. I think I mean at the video, I mean, obviously we watched a lot of MTV. I had MTV. I watched MTV all the time. And, I mean, it was like a fake live performance, right? You dancing around, hitting the keyboards, doing 90s stuff, dancing.
Well,
Uh,
and
Neon, I don't know.
anyone who's everyone, what's the phrase? Everyone knows unbelievable. A few
Yeah.
people heard Lies, but really it's all about unbelievable. So that
And
was
again,
kind of what,
the sample, right? Everyone because of the sample.
yeah, and it went number one in the U.S.
Yes. And
Number
the
one
sample.
hit.
And for those of us out there that don't know, Unbelievable has a very prominent sample of Andrew Dice Clay going, which I did not know in the early 90s at all.
And it has about three or four other very prominent samples, which you can now find on TikTok, whatever videos, which it's all very interesting. They were a
Mhm.
sample heavy band. But let's
Yes.
talk about, can we talk about Unexplained? So
Yes.
Unexplained, the album that we're actually talking about today, 20 minutes in,
Yep.
uh, was
All
released.
back.
It was released on April 20th, 1992. So, Mike checks notes. That is nearly 33 years ago, Casey.
It is right on the precipice of what would remove all this music from the airwaves, and that music was called grunge.
Correct. 1992. Very interesting timing. It was a very brief window of time where this EMF Jesus Jones thing was happening. Um, but on Unexplained, there's no more white kid funk, right? There's everything is pretty much minor key. Um, they stopped doing the whole thing where like if it were Schubert Dip, they would do a verse where James is like rapping essentially to the
Mhm.
drum beat, and then the music comes in for the chorus. But on this album, you have they deliberately decided not to try to remake Unbelievable. Like these are the song structures are not that different, but it is a lot darker. Um, we talked about the fact that it's an EP. I must have gone to the mall and been like, "Look, a new EMF album, EP. What's this? It's only 4 songs." I will never forget. I told you this before. When I hear this, I am transported
Uh-huh.
back to driving to Clear Lake with your family and just blasting the Unexplained EP
Nice.
on the way to Clear Lake. So tell me your impressions of this 4 song set.
I played it quite a few times. Getting through the first track is actually the single from Stigma, which is the next actual full album. So, it really is kind of a highlighting of what would become.
That's
And I'm
right.
not familiar with that one, but I mean, there's only 4 tracks. The keys seem real simple, a lot more guitar driven. Mike's gonna have a lot more to add to this than I, but for me, the songs all hit pretty good. They kind of blend and feel the same. The real standout is the thing we're probably going to talk about the most, which is the fourth track, which is a Stooges cover of Search and Destroy.
Yeah, we'll
Uh,
get there.
and yeah, I mean it's a pleasant listen. The cover's kind of weird. I didn't have a lot of notes, but I really enjoyed listening to it.
Let's listen to a little bit of the first song, Getting Through.
I left my trust on the tail of youth. We were so unsure of the things we'd seen. These are ways of getting through. These are things I do for you. And ask me, I'll be there too.
All right. So I love this song. I love it. I love this kind of Egyptian, quote unquote
Yeah.
Egyptian sound, maybe Middle
Hmm.
Eastern. I was
Yeah.
thinking about the intervals, like what is it that makes it? So there's a lot of minor seconds. Uh, and then there's this like tritone thing that comes in too that makes it sound so like menacing and like evil, which is the
Yeah.
tritone. It's the
Yeah. Yeah.
devil's
Yeah.
interval, as they say.
Yes.
Apparently, Dench's father was a flamenco guitarist.
Mm.
Um, the unbelievable riff is like the first half of it is blues, and then the second half of it is like a flamenco. So it's like
Mm.
bump a bump a bump ba da ba bum ba dump ba da da da. That's that
Huh.
minor second kind
Huh.
of Eastern sensibility, which I find pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is cool.
I love the part of this song where then it locks into these major chords and it goes, "These are things I do for you." It's so satisfying. What a cool moment in the song. Great lyrics, such a simple task to touch your depths. To
Hmm.
touch your depths.
Yeah, he's singing a little more like what would be the more contemporary sound, but still pretty breathy. Um,
Uh,
was this the single on their next full album? Was this
I
on
mean,
Stigma?
everything I can tell about Stigma, and I did own
You did
Stigma.
have it for sure.
I did. Everything I can read is that it was an absolute flop. I don't think
Uh-huh.
it
Yeah.
this song was not a single that I know of. There are a couple songs on Stigma that were singles in the UK and did pretty well. This was not one of
Mhm.
them. Um, I
Little
love
kids.
the halftime drums at the end where it kicks back in with the beat, but it's halftime. I think that's a really cool effect too. I just think it's a really well crafted. Um, I don't know, like the song. They put a lot of effort into making this unique and interesting. I think.
Yeah. Is there samples on this one? Because we haven't fully delved into the whole sampling of this, and I want to cover it, but it seems like on this they're kind of getting away from it a little bit. Like the keyboardist is just doing the keys instead of samples too. Is that true or
They are getting away from it. There are some prominent ones. They're just not like spoken before the song starts or whatever. Like um the same has a really good sample. Well, I'll save that until we get there. But
okay?
part one of the reasons I love these songs is because of all the layers.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure all four of these have at least some samples in them. They're just buried a little bit more in the mix, but they add a lot of really cool texture, I
We
think.
know Search and Destroy does.
Yes. So Far From Me, second song. I like the synth in this one in the background. Let's listen to a little bit of this.
It's just a shame when time age, leave a taste. And face it, this I think I'm missing part of it. That makes it click. And it seems to me like you always seem to be far from me.
What do you think of Far From Me?
There's good background vocals on this, right? I don't know if it's harmonizing, but in my notes I have that. And yeah, a really great riff. Uh,
Yeah, they've got the hey background vocals, which may be a
oh yeah,
sample
now
or it might be the band. I'm not sure.
that just clicked it in my brain. Now I hear it. Like the minute you did that, I was like, "Thank you, thank you."
Deep, deep,
Now
deep,
yeah.
bip, bip, bip. Yep. It's
I mean,
cool. It's a cool
it
track
will.
too, in my opinion. It's good, fast-paced rock.
Oh yeah, and I've been leaving the elephant out of the room here because what would come after this in America certainly was the scene of grunge and what would be alt music, how they would try to sell it. But what would come like in the late 90s, like starting when I was a senior in high school, was real EDM and like Prodigy and all that. And this is such the beginning of that. Although pop and although presented completely differently, there's so much electronic music in EMF. And it would hit, but it hit like 6, 7 years later, you know?
Yeah, you're right. You could
It
draw a
did.
line from Far From Me to The Prodigy. I could hear it.
Oh yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
Big time. And all those groups too, like and trip hop too. I don't want to go off on a huge tangent, but yeah, I mean,
Well,
this
and
is
the Bristol sound. I mean, this
yeah.
that's where those what do you call it? Portishead and all.
Mhm. All the trip hop, tricky, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, these guys kind of hit on something, you know? And it does, even though they have this sound, this digital sound, this synth sound, this sampling sound, this hip hop sound, there's this still a very organic sound. I would never put them in the same boat as CNC or Ace of Base.
Right.
Never.
There's and that's kind of why I wanted to cover them for this episode, partly for nostalgia because I just love this
Yeah.
album at a pivotal time in my life, but I also think there's a lot more to this band than what people remember.
Yeah.
And not to take away from Unbelievable because I mean it was a smash hit, good for
Yeah.
them.
They were a
But
one-hit wonder to most of the world. They were a one-hit wonder.
there's like a lot of really cool, especially guitar work. And like you
Yeah.
say, they were probably more influential than people give them credit for in terms of the electronic wave that was to come.
Well, I mean, they got pigeonholed into a small niche, and that niche went away really quick.
Yeah.
So not only are they a one-hit wonder, but they're also like people this day. If you ask people on the street, they would have no idea what EMF was. They'd have no idea they were British. They had no idea that a lot of people can consider them British hip hop. There's all this stuff, you know, rave culture, early electronic music. Like people wouldn't have a clue.
Well, yeah, and the synth stuff that they were doing even on Stigma, even though it was a lot more rock driven, but the synth stuff that was happening basically was completely out of fashion in
Oh yeah.
92 because that was grunge and that was Pearl Jam and that was kind of back to basics.
Yeah.
Get those synths out of here, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, it's always been a big thing with rock and with metal and so many things, but with this specifically, you know, I bet record labels were like, no, that's so 80s, you know, and that's why when we had this more organic, we'll call it rock, but what would be labeled grunge, like when we had this raw youth movement in America, They latched onto that so hard because, you know, even though electronic would come after that, they're like, this is the 80s, you know.
Yeah,
As it proved, it would actually be what was the 90s, you know. Grunge was just a thing that lasted for a couple years, you know.
sure.
Very strange. A lot of marketing.
Yeah, and I just feel like EMF got lost because they didn't have
Oh yeah.
a way to
Big time.
market themselves other than the goofy white boy hip hop thing. So,
I think it's little more than a stadium hit now. Like unbelievable. I don't even think it gets played on the radio. It's just like one of those songs that'll get everyone pumped at the game, you know?
yep, yep.
So
So the same track three.
from me. For real, it washes in the rain. Hang out, it never quite seems the same. For real, it washes in the rain. Hang out sometime. It's never the same.
You hear that high sample, that wailing sample that I just think adds so much to this song. Whenever they add these super interesting just textures, I think that is so innovative and cool. This is a real virtuoso guitar and keyboard break that I have a feeling was all Dench. I have a feeling this was Ian Dench through and through. Let's listen to a bit of this.
this one I
Well,
think is the sleeper, right? Like track three is the sleeper of the four, right?
I think it's great. I think it's
Okay.
catchy, got some amazing guitar work, like you said.
So
So
it's not the same.
correct.
All right.
This is a buried treasure here. The same. All right, we got to talk about Search and Destroy, Casey.
Success, right? Apocalypse across the sky.
I'm a streetwalker cheater with a heart full of napalm. I'm a runaway son.
All right.
So
Who
I
wants to
think
tell our version, our story of it?
so. Okay, just this version of the song was my first introduction to the song, and that's weird.
As well.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, this is a cool song." What they were doing, I think, is they were trying to identify themselves with punk rock, and then like guitar, like they were essentially trying to distance themselves from the goofy image they have on Schubert, and good for them.
Well,
Um,
I'm going to go on a little bit more of a tangent here. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Iggy Pop in England, a god. If you've seen Train Spotting, you understand it. And like I said, with these guys being what would become drug rave culture or what was in the starting, there's certainly a lot of references in this. I think here they're showing that. They're showing what was in Train Spotting, where all the heroin junkies love Iggy Pop to death. He's the only thing that matters. Lust for life, that stuff. And I think they're doing a nod here, an early nod, even a nod that was picked up by that community in England.
ooh,
Like,
interesting.
I think that's a real predecessor, a real prototype for a real scene.
That's
And
cool.
we're just dumb kids. Mike and I we're just dumb kids. I have MTV as a source, and I'm going and recording with a VCR Sunday night, 120 minutes, and watching through it to see all this obscure music, and then showing it to Mike. And that's really up in Ukiah, California. That's our really only connection to the world. Like one trip to Amoeba. It's like, oh, we don't know anything. So when we hear this cool song, somehow we decide to cover it.
Yeah. So our band Hideous Kids
Destroy.
did a cover. I would say we did a cover of the EMF version of
Yes.
Search and Destroy.
We did not cover the Stooges. We did not know it was the Stooges. Apparently, Mike did not know how to read his liner notes. Uh,
Well, and keep in mind we had no internet, so we just had what we had.
well, in a year or so, we'd have dial-up where we could get like one picture of the Beastie Boys for like $5 a dial-up time, and it took like 30 minutes, and it was like, what? Like, why would you do that? But that was early internet. That shows early fandom. But so Search and Destroy is on the famous Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Some people consider it first Iggy Pop solo album. Sure, whatever. It's not my favorite. David Bowie produced it. Search and Destroy, famously the back piece tattoo for Henry Rollins of Black Flag and Rollins Band. So they do a cover on this. It's the fourth track. It's got samples. We covered it. We put in the samples.
I,
Hopefully we'll play a clip right here. Let's hear the Hideous Kids cover of EMF's Search and Destroy.
Save my soul. Get away from me.
wow. So I would say EMF's version, I mean, it's a good effort. It kind of removes the soul of the song. The Hideous Kids version, I mean, we we
Nailed it.
nailed it. We were having fun with it, but notice that we attempted to say the samples that are in the EMF version, which is just so funny.
It's CB mics, is why I think it works, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst thing we ever did.
Oh no, it's good. Although you hit a very flat note.
You're singing.
Oh no. Okay, never mind. I hit a very flat note.
I like it. It's charming. I just remember like doing take after take trying to get that dumb sample timed right. I'm like, why did we even anyway?
This is like 95?
Yeah, I mean probably 94, 95, but
It's
it's what
recorded
we
at your
knew.
house.
Yeah, it was at my house. Yeah. So EMF did go on to make the album Stigma, which I like. I would call it like a C plus. I mean, there's a lot of kind of, but they did have a couple of big hits. I'll just play a little bit of them here. Notice how much darker this music is. I'm
Mm.
going to play a little bit from There Here, which was a single, and then the final song, which is The Light That Burns Twice as Bright, burns half as dull. So EMF went on to do another album in the 90s. Then they went on a very long hiatus. They reunited a few more times to perform, I think as recently as like 2022. Interesting fact is that James Atkin, the singer, became a secondary school teacher, and now he's a music technology tutor,
Nice.
according to LinkedIn. So,
Nice.
James Atkin, thank you for teaching the youth of England. I guess it's cool that he had another career after EMF.
Totally, totally. Uh,
Any other thoughts on EMF before we move on?
a lot more thoughts here. I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking about other bands of this era. So there's Jesus Jones, there's EMF, but are there more? And I did come up with a few. One of them that I came up with was Stereo MCs. Now, I don't know when they had a big hit, but as it turns out, Stereo MCs in 1990, in their second album, Elevate My Mind, they toured with EMF, and Elevate My Mind was the first British hip hop US Billboard R&B single to chart. So they're, again, they kind of became more rock oriented, but they had this sound too. And they were considered by Billboard at least British hip hop.
Okay.
And then later came us three. So the one thing that connects those bands I just mentioned was sampling, right? The sampler came out in 1988 that was affordable, the Akai MPC 60, and that changed American hip hop dramatically. But what the British folk did with it was this sound. They kind of implied it. That's not the right word, but they put it into this kind of weird rock electronic music. And it really did change music. I mean, to some degree, real true British hip hop wouldn't come along for a long time. But at the time, that's what this was.
So whereas like the Beastie Boys were making Paul's Boutique, the British version of that was incorporating samples into rock music.
Yeah, to a level. And now I'm sure there's a full hip hop that I don't know of from the late 80s, early 90s. But these groups, Stereo MCs and whatnot, they were considered, at least by Billboard, which I'm sure is erroneous, as British hip hop, just because of using these different techniques in their music. That's all it took to be considered hip hop in England. So there is a real weird, I mean, you could write a dissertation on it, no doubt. But the one thing that I wanted to add, and then I think we're good, I want to say is, do you know what preceded the sampler?
No.
It was big money, the Mellotron, which worked on tape. So a
Ah.
sampler, the Akai and all those, the Roland and all those that came in, that was just a digital version. You didn't need to use tape. So back in the day, I mean, like the Mellotron, Beatles, and we saw it on Smashing Pumpkins' Cherub Rock, which is actually a secret first episode. The Mellotron was very expensive. It was like a really primitive tape sampler, you know?
Hmm.
So in reality, labeling something with a sampler as hip hop is completely erroneous. But, what is Billboard going to do, right?
Very good. Thank you for the
Anywho,
education.
thank you.
And hats off to EMF. Great
Yeah.
band.
All right. So for my pick, we are going on a absolute new journey, but at the same time, a formative one for myself and to a degree, probably Mike. Although I don't think he's aware of this band. This next band that I'm choosing for next episode came out in the late 80s, and they really changed uh, the environment and the sound for what would become for at least a decade or more. Not to mention, not just a scene, but those of you who know this. And those of you who don't, maybe you like Green Day or Bay Area Punk or AFI, you're about to learn where it all started here because without Operation Ivy, there's no ska. There's certainly no ska punk in the 90s. And there's not this huge, incredible youth movement of optimism and social justice and non-conformity and this amazing scene that is Gilman that we'll get into next episode. But yeah, Operation Ivy, the most aptly titled album of all time, Energy. And as you can see here, and we'll get into it more, I have the Mendocino County Press, Laytonville, P.O. Box 1000, baby.
Way cool, man. Way cool.
Home County represent a
Looking
band,
forward to it.
a
I'm
band that broke up before they even started.
I'm looking forward to the education. I'm a little ignorant here. This is
You
good.
know them?
I not really.
Your new favorite band.
I'm a fan of a lot of punk rock, so this is good.
Ska punk.
Okay.
You're probably thinking, what the heck?
Can't
I'll
wait.
put one factoid in here. The band broke up in May of 1989, and at their performance at Gilman, after literally performing like 200 shows in a year, they broke up. The album had been out for like 2 months, but they couldn't relate to being successful. And that show where they broke up was the first show at Gilman that Green Day performed as Green Day and not Sweet Children.
Wow.
Join us next time.
There it is. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.